Okay, hello. My name is Lisa, and I'm here with Julia Davis, and we are here to talk about this very awesome book called Wild Power. Yay! So, Julia, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Julia Davis. I teach yoga in North Finchley, and I teach it from a perspective of women's life cycles. So from menarche, when you have your first bleed, through to wise woman, which is post-menopause. So this book is very relevant to me and my life work at the moment. And would you
Gorgeous.
like to introduce yourself, Lisa?
I will, yeah. So, my name is Lisa de Jong, and I'm originally from Ireland, but now living in Manchester. And I have just started working as a women's coach in Menstruality. I recently completed the training of the apprenticeship training of Red School with Alexandra and Sjanie, Hugo, Wurlitzer, who are the authors, wonderful authors of Wild Power. And yeah, I actually was diagnosed with endometriosis a few years ago. So I have been on a journey of self-discovery and healing through my body. And this book and this work in this book has been incredible and has really helped me find peace and healing with my menstrual cycle. So I'm very excited to talk about this book and our experiences with the world of menstruality. So,
So I was thinking, just to give you an idea of what this book's about and why it means a lot to me, I've got a teenage daughter, I've got a preteen as well, and this book begins with a manifesto, and in that manifesto it talks about, I'll just flick it open, it talks about the vision of the book, and I'll just read you one of the paragraphs there. When a girl arrives at menarche, the first bleed, she feels a real dignity, a strong yes in her being. Once her cycle has established itself, she learns how to chart it, record the physical, mental, and emotional pattern, so she can literally read her own body. Awareness of the menstrual cycle becomes second nature to her, as natural as eating and sleeping. I would love for that to be true for every teenage girl, not least my own teenage girls coming through. And this book is a blueprint for that. I just wonder whether you wanted to take that a bit further, Lisa, and sort of
yeah, that's gorgeous, Julia. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a wonderful opening. Just there when you said charting your cycle in the manifesto. So, what does that mean to chart your cycle? What does it mean for you, Julia?
So for me, when I first looked into it, and it is talked about in Wild Power in a broad way, for me, it was all about the winter of my cycle. So I looked at it as seasons, the winter of my cycle being when I bleed, when I've got my period, when I need my quiet time. The spring of my cycle is now for me, I am day 8 in my cycle. So it's all kind of, you're bouncy, you feel renewed, you feel like that you kind of everything's kind of ready to start and go. And the summer of my cycle, I might feel a bit sexy in the summer of my cycle. I feel like I want to go to parties and put myself out there and wear something that I really love. And when I choose something for my wardrobe when I'm in the summer of my cycle, I feel confident in that choice rather than not being quite sure whether that's what I should be wearing that day. And I also care a lot less about things when I'm in the summer of my cycle. I'm much more likely to go wild. I'm also very likely to fill my entire diary for the next kind of 3 years when I'm in the summer of my cycle. So it is a dangerous point. I often overextend myself. And then there's the autumn of my cycle. And if I don't know the autumn of my cycle is coming, if I haven't tracked my cycle, then that can really bite me on the bum. And it can also bite everyone else around me on the bum. That's when I'm most likely to scream at my children for the mess that is their bedrooms, or snap at my husband because he's home late, or, just be the horrible me that I can be. But also, if I do know that it's the autumn of my cycle, that might be when I'm writing my blog and I edit it, or when I write a program of what I want to teach in my yoga, and I write a lesson plan that I love, or I just know that that's a time in my cycle when I can kind of cut out the rubbish and make everything clear and real. So it's quite nice. So those are that's how I see my cycle. How about you, Lisa? You tell me about yours.
Wow, thanks, Julie. That's a really good description of your inner seasons. Yeah, I'm actually quite similar to you. I in my bleed, so because I have endometriosis, I can experience insane cramping. So it's with the work of charting my cycle, I've really learned to really take downtime during my bleed. And actually, there's a quote in this book that I absolutely love about the winter of the cycle, and it says here, all human beings need downtime. We lucky women get a monthly built-in reminder to claim it. And I love that quote because, in a way, what I've learned over the years is that the cramping, I made some dietary changes and some lifestyle changes as well to my life to help alleviate the cramps. But ultimately, it was really about letting go and taking time to myself to rest during the bleed, and even the days up of coming before the bleed as well. That was a really important time for me to just really let go. And what I love about this book as well, Alexandra and Sjanie, they really, really highlight that it's not about making drastic changes. It's about just 1% changes. So for me, it might have started with just taking an extra 10 minutes in the morning to do a very gentle meditation or some gentle yoga before starting the day. And then over time, those 1% built up to actually being able to take, sometimes, not always, the day off my work. So then I literally just do nothing on the first day of my bleed, which is just amazing. So that's really, really helped my my winter. And then similar to you, Julia, and I think this is a problem for a lot of women, because I've heard a lot of women speak about this phenomenon, about, really running out of their winter into spring. And it's this kind of exciting energy and that kind of build of hormones, and we're back out into the world and we're excited to get out and meet people. We're kind of eager to get to summer, if you will. But actually, that's kind of proved difficult for me, in that I can get really drained if I run out of my my winter cave. So I've had to really learn to just come out really gently, and then if I do that, I don't feel so overwhelmed. But it comes down to the 1% changes. And then in summer, similar to you as well, I could just wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and just think, like, wow, I look amazing. I don't need to wear makeup today. This is great, And then autumn for me is now, I think, because it's changed over time, but autumn for me now is one of my favorite seasons. It used to be really difficult, and I used to get a lot of PMS and felt very moody and would snap at people. But now, what I really like about autumn is that I have this really strong desire to be out in nature and to read poetry and do things that kind of nourish my soul a little bit more. And that really helps me kind of settle into that kind of coming into the cave, into the winter. And the analogy I love to think about autumn is actually of the when you were describing editing your blog, is of like the leaves falling from trees in the actual outer autumn. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like, okay, well, what do we not need anymore? What's not serving us anymore? Because obviously the trees need to let go of the leaves in order to allow for new life to come through in the spring after the winter. So yeah, it's every cycle is like different, because also what's important for me is to kind of look at what's actually going on in my outer world. So I could have a really busy month and then I could have a horrible autumn. So every cycle is kind of different, but what I have just explained is usually it's usually kind of stereotypical for me. Yeah,
that's lovely, Lisa. Thank you. I love that leaves falling the trees, especially as I'm looking outside my window and I'm seeing the leaves falling from the trees.
Oh, they're gorgeous, aren't they?
Yeah, I love them. Autumn's my favourite real season as well. Not quite yet my favourite inner season, but it's certainly my favourite outer season. Just to go back to our lovely Wild Power, I don't know whether anyone's noticed, but both Lisa and I have been referring to our bleed as our bleed, and there is blood on the front page of this book. Yeah. And it still now feels really radical in the world outside of the conversation I'm having with Lisa to talk about a bleed rather than a period or giving it some kind of other name. And I love that they have got blood on the front of this book, and bleed time is about menstruation, when we bleed. And the more of us that can talk about it in our normal everyday lives in this way, I think the better. And just to go in a little bit more detail of the cycle, in this book, they talk about the via positiva and the via negativa. So basically that's your positive life and your quiet life. And that is halves of the cycle, the via positiva being the spring, summer, and the via negativa being the autumn coming into winter. And I found that really useful for me, because the way that I think even though I had studied womb yoga before I came to this work, and I thought I was very aware of my menstrual cycle and what was going on with that, having it spelled out to me was really, really helpful, because what I realized is that I was living my entire cycle, including my bleed, really, in via positiva. I had taken on board the adverts that I saw as a child with the woman horse riding across the desert in her white dress while she had her bleed. And I took that to heart, and I was like, I can do anything during my bleed. I know I'm not meant to do a headstand, and I know I'm meant to take things more easily, but I can do anything. Part of that is that until very recently, I had been on the pill. And I didn't even realize, being on the pill, that what that meant was that I did not ovulate. And I'm a pretty well-educated woman, and I really needed somebody to bash me on the head and say, did you know that all those years that you were taking the pill, the reason why you didn't make babies is because you were not ovulating. So you weren't experiencing your cycle in the way that's described in this book. Which is probably why I lived my life in a very via positiva way. And now my body honors the cycle, and so I have to honor my body in its cycle. And that means watching things when I come into autumn and winter, and knowing that I'm not somebody who's got energy 24/7, 365 days of the year, and there needs to be a downtime. And I have my body to tell me when my downtime is. I'll pass over to Lisa.
I just got shivers when you said that. That's gorgeous. It's so true. It's really it's kind of this beautiful journey of coming to know ourselves, isn't it, as women and as people through our menstrual cycle, and coming to know our bodies and learning how to listen and tune into the subtleties, because a lot of this work is quite subtle. It can be quite subtle. But yeah, I can relate to that as well. That via positiva, kind of masculine, linear driven energy. I mean, that was me all over up until recently as well. And it's hard. It is hard, isn't it? Coming into a slightly more feminine, cyclical way of living our lives in this world that's very goal oriented and achievement oriented. And when I was at the Women's Quest apprenticeship training, actually 2 weeks ago, I had this image of like a Celtic spiral, and it just occurred to me one day that because it is hard, it's really hard, especially when you're new to this work, to take downtime. And sometimes when I take downtime, what comes up for me then is a huge feeling of irritability or restlessness when I'm trying to take it easy, and all I want to do is like sit on Facebook and call friends and watch loads of movies, or just get my mind distracted, which I guess is fine when you're starting out. But when you really want to take downtime, for me it's better to have a little bit of time where I don't have all this outer distraction. What I want to say is with the Celtic spiral, if you think about spirals, it goes around in a circle, and it's if we're moving forward in our ovulation from spring to summer, it feels like we're moving forward, and then when we hit ovulation, we're coming back, and back through autumn and then into winter. So it can feel like if we're thinking about time in a linear way, it can feel like we're moving backwards, but we're not. We're just entering a new cycle. Does that make sense? So that's why it can be so hard in that via negativa phase, the autumn winter phase of the cycle, to take the 1% of downtime, because we're just not used to it, are we? Culturally.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think, it's a story for many of us, because it's a story that we're told through the culture in which we live and the advertisements that we see. What this book tells us as well, it talks about charting the cycle. And the easiest way to chart the cycle is to count from day one, which is the first day of your full flow bleed, right the way through to when you bleed again. So it's day 1, day 2, counting all the way through. And this book taught me that it is a really wonderful idea to do that, because then I'm much more able to understand where my seasons come. So it's very easy to read the bleed time, because when the bleed stops, then winter's ended or winter's coming to an end. But it's less easy to read the rest of the cycle, especially if you don't have a 28-day typical cycle. But if you count your days, then you can see what's coming. And you're much more likely to notice your spring and when ovulation is going to happen, and how autumn happens. And you're also much more likely to be able to see your patterns. So in this book, there is a whole chapter which looks at the critic, which looks at the autumn, and which helps you to manage and work with that time in your cycle. But if you don't have a clue when that is, and you're not quite sure what's going on, because life is busy, then you won't know that easily how to use this book to your best advantage. But by counting my cycle, it's pretty common that somewhere around day 21 and 22, something's going to happen that's going to, I'm going to be in a situation where I need to watch my tongue, or I need to watch myself, or I think I've been the most terrible person in the world. But because I know it's day 21 or 22, I'll cut myself some slack. I'll make sure the people around me who love me know, and it makes life easier to manage.
Yes.
So it's just, this is what this book does for me in my cycle. This is why I'm trying to persuade everybody and their sister, because it makes life easier for them. And also, sometimes when things are not okay in our life, we think then they're always not okay. Like, I'm having this day 21 blip, but because I haven't tracked my cycle, I think that's me. That is me always and forever. I am always this agitated person. But actually, that's not true. That's my day 21, 22 personage that I can deal with when I know that that's me. So it's really nice to know that. So that, that's one of the things I've really found that this book has helped me with, is knowing my patterns.
Wow. And that sounds so self-accepting when you're saying that. It's like I can get the sense of we're a lot less harder on ourselves then, aren't we, when we understand ourselves better through our cycles. Totally. And then it's bringing about some inner kindness into even just a little bit into our lives when we have those blip moments, especially when we cross over into the new season.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, Lisa? Just explain what you mean by crossing over the season.
Yeah. So when we chart our cycle, and I'll come back again after I say this because I want to speak about how exactly I chart my cycle. So we have the distinct seasons that Julia explained at the start, but when we cross over into the seasons, some women will notice that they'll have like a crossover day in between. So the day between spring and summer, and then the day between, so for example, as well, a typical example would be from autumn to winter. And for me, it's not as noticeable. I'm still trying to understand what happens in my crossover days, but sometimes I notice. So for example, I could have a day where I'm crossing from spring into summer. I could have a day where I just feel really self-conscious, just like really, really self-conscious. And I struggle with people even just looking at me. And that would be kind of a typical crossover day for me. Or I could feel really tired, but at the same time, not able to sleep. So last night, I think I had one of those days. I couldn't sleep until 3. And so I'm on day 21 now, and I think I could potentially be entering into my inner autumn, and I usually have around a 28 to 30 day cycle. Yeah, so they're my crossover days. So some women find them difficult, and some women mightn't even notice them. But it's good to ask ourselves, do I experience something different in my crossover days? And then to bring a little bit more, again, a little bit more inner kindness. Alexandra talks a lot about how it is hard because we're entering entering a new territory for that part of the cycle. So it makes sense that we might, wobble a little bit. Yeah.
So you said you wanted to talk about how you chart your cycle.
Yeah, just
can you talk about that in relation to kind of what Wild Power tells us?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in Wild Power, what does it tell us about charting cycle? I guess it starts with you can actually start with where you're at. You don't even need to wait until your next period. You can just write down the day and the date. And then what I usually do is, in Wild Power, it says to chart physical symptoms. So it could be something like, for example, when I get PMS, my breasts can get quite tender and bigger, and I would write that down. Or you could have vaginal discharge around ovulation, or you could feel more sexual at a certain time in cycle in summer, for example. So typical physical symptoms, or even just dry skin or spots or something like that. And then so I have a physical section, and then I have emotional, so how I feel emotionally. And it could even just be like a one-liner. Overall, it was, a lonely day. And I sometimes could write that down, I felt quite lonely today. Like it's trying to capture in words, or some women like to use art as well. But for me, it's words. I like to capture in words just the kind of overall tone. So physical symptoms, emotional, and sometimes spiritual, and meant any kind of mental things. So maybe I have a certain thought going around in my mind all day long, or I'm worrying about something in particular, whereas on another day I'm able to let go of that. So I actually have here, I'll just show you very briefly. I have here my notebook. So what I have is like quadrants. And so one quadrant would just be a day. And this is all, I don't know if that makes sense, but these would all be on the same. So this would all be different months with the same day. So this is day 21s for different months. So I have them all beside each other. And it's literally just that little piece that I write before I go to sleep at night. Just to, like, I don't like to spend too much time on it. It doesn't have to be a huge big deal, but just to write down something. And then there are days where I miss it as well. So it's not perfect. Yeah. How about you, Julia?
I use a tracker for mine.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I've got a tracker on my phone that I use, and I was really resistant when Wild Power first came out, and Sjanie and Alexandra were talking about tracking the cycle. I immediately went on the defense and was like, how on earth can someone who has a busy life track their cycle daily? That just sounds completely undoable. And what was wonderful is that they already had the answer to that, which was the 1%.
Yeah.
We're not asking everybody to change their lives immediately. If you can do 1%, then you can do 1%. But I thought, you know what, I'm just going to see how it goes doing this. And I just actually looked at my tracker today, and I traced it back. And I started writing daily in my diary. I do miss the odd day now, in February. And it's really nice to do. And the fact that I've done that means that I do have an idea of what's going on in my cycle. So it's really helpful to look at your physical symptoms as well, because if you can look at your physicality and what's happening in your body, then you can get a good idea of when you ovulate. And it's really just, I found it comforting to know what my body is doing when, in relation to my ability to make babies or not. I'm reasonably, I'm kind of away from the world where I want to be making babies anymore. But just knowing that, and I think that it would have been wonderful to have been a child having reached menarche, to have started tracking my cycle from a young age, and then I would have known what these symptoms of, or what happens in my body at ovulation. And most people who ovulate have particular things that happen in their body at ovulation that they're aware of. And some people can even feel the egg pop. I tend to have menstruation conversations over dinner. And I remember I was at an event with some young women who are kind of family friends, and we were talking about tracking our cycle, and both of them said to me, one was I think 16 and one was 18, and they both said, yeah, I know when I ovulate. I know the day that I ovulate. And I just thought, wow. And they both had trackers. They both had period trackers. So I thought, that's so amazing to have that understanding of your cycle at such a young age. Is a really, really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And it allows us to own our womanhood. Just knowing what happens in our bodies and when and how allows us to own it, so that when we start making decisions about contraception and about, you know, whether we want to make babies or not, we know what's happening in our bodies, and we know how our bodies are affected by things. So being empowered is, you know, I think that's what femininity is all about being, you know, people talk about feminism. For me, feminism is about owning my own body and knowing how my body works, and that's the core, that's the starting point of my feminism. And if we don't have that, it's like if we don't have our roots, if we don't have wild power, if we don't know how our body works, if we don't know what happens in our cycle, if we don't know why we have the challenges that we can possibly face when we have our periods, or the challenges that we have in our lives that maybe don't seem to be period related, then what are we going to do? So I actually have a chronic condition. And what that means is that I can get really, really strong dips in my energy. And so if I'm living my life in spring the whole time, or spring, summer the whole time, then what that's going to do is that's going to kick me on the bum, and I'm going to get a massive dip. So I've never had endometriosis. I have had period pains, but I've never had, you know, a specific labelable period issue. What I've had is life issues that if I track my period, I am less likely to experience those huge downs.
Wow.
So that's what Wild Power has given to me, learning that there is winter, and however hard it is to honor that winter, it's there for me to honor. That's teaching me on a monthly basis how to look after myself. And actually, one thing I wanted to ask you, Lisa, and I don't know the answer to this, so say, but Wild Power goes into quite a lot of detail about the bleed time. And I haven't had some of the experiences that they talk about when they talk about the chambers in the bleed time. And I think it would be lovely to hear from somebody who maybe has had more experience of the positive aspects of winter.
Okay, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that, Julia. Winter, you know, let's be honest, it can be a really difficult time for, you know, most women. And a lot of women suffer greatly with it, and they suffer in silence. So it is time that we talk about it and address it in a more holistic way, that is empowering, as you said, to women. So I used to hate my winter. I used to absolutely hate getting my period, and I hated the whole menstrual cycle. I had a really negative relationship with it. But over time, over a long time, I've managed to develop a lot more of an accepting relationship with it now, and that changes month to month. So some months I could have a really bad cramping experience, and then other times I might not. But when I've had good moments, I've had a kind of a sense of the book does talk about the inner chambers, which I won't go into in detail, but just to kind of give you a general explanation of what potentially could be positive in winter is once you learn how to really let go, even in the days coming up to winter, which I think is really important actually, just to practice the letting go in the days coming up really slowly so they're not crashing like a train. You do get a sense of really surrendering into something bigger than ourselves. And it can be just an incredible time for rest and renewal. And I really feel that in my body. I really feel this, physical, emotional, spiritual replenishing happening. But I have to be really still. And it can even just be for like half an hour. And then I could feel, I personally get a sense of being very clear around my boundaries in winter. So when I spoke earlier about having self-conscious feelings sometimes in summer, I don't feel self-conscious at all in winter, even though it can be a very exposing time and a vulnerable time for women to be on their period. I can, especially on day one, I can feel really just really grounded in myself and rooted in my body. And then maybe after a day or two, when I come out of that kind of cave-like experience, I can have, you know, in the middle of the night or in the morning, anytime, like half an hour of just loads of ideas coming through and loads of insight about things and creative ideas. But then the trick is to not act on them, because for ages I would have acted on them and then used up all my energy and crashed in spring. But now I just write some ideas down in a journal and keep it for later. But yeah, so it kind of depends month on month, and it depends as well, like the tone, because the tone of the overall cycle then kind of sets what's going to happen. How you manage the cycle sets the tone, for the winter. So it all really depends on the month per month. But what I will say as well is in Wild Power, something I love what Alexandra and Sjanie write about a lot in each chapter is something called the Big Red Rule. And so the Big Red Rule is a rule whereby each woman has their own unique experience. So what I personally experience in my own cycle will be different for every other woman. So some women could have really horrendous Mittelschmerz, which is that cramping that some women get when they're ovulating, and they mightn't have any kind of cramping when they're menstruating. Or they might be full of energy at one time when others aren't usually. So that's why menstrual cycle awareness is really important, and keeping track of your cycle, even just with the 1%, because it helps you to understand who you are and what your cycle is and what your cycle is doing, because there is no one size fits all, really, is there, Julia? It's really yeah. And we're all just so different. Yeah. So do you want to say anything else before we finish up for today?
I just think to end my talk about Wild Power is just talk about how easy it is to follow. So I've looked at, quite interested in lots of books that touch on menstruality, and there's some lovely books for children, and there's wonderful yoga books that are big tomes, but and also there are lots of books that look at the problems connected to menstruation and look at things from a problem solving point of view. And what I really, really loved about this book, it wasn't you have this problem, let's look at the issues and how we can solve them. This is, you menstruate, here's a Bible to show you how to live that. So basically, I often find myself in a season, and I just open the book at that season and have a little read, and that might be how I'm feeling that season, and it might not be how I'm feeling that season, but it just allows me to be part of a family of people who look at their seasons. And I'll be in winter and I'll look at this and I'll kind of think, okay, one day I might not feel like when I stop, like I'm making myself stop. I'm like at some point, or when I kind of give myself the opportunity to really chill out in winter, it's like, okay, I'm just going to have a little read of Wild Power to remind myself why I'm allowed to do this. So just, I would recommend this book to anybody who owns a vagina, or anybody who knows somebody who owns a womb, because it just tells you how it can be. And it was just the most refreshing thing that I could have read to help me on my way as a menstruating woman.
Thank you, Julia. That's gorgeous. Yeah, it's so incredibly empowering, this work, that's in here, like you've said already. And I'm so incredibly grateful for all of the wisdom that's gone into this book. And you're right, it's really accessible to read. It's not woo-woo. It's really grounded and practical. And you don't have to you don't have to read it from start to finish. You can dip in and out. And yeah, it's just it is like a Bible in a way, isn't it? As you can see, I was preparing for this call, and I was like, all these little things that are so many things to talk about that I can't fit into one book review. But yeah, I definitely recommend it for anyone, any woman. But also at the very start, there's a section on who this book could be read by, and it does say that it's for women who are perimenopausal or postmenopausal as well. It can be read by men. It can be read by people who don't have who aren't menstruating or who don't have wombs. So it really is accessible to anyone who's curious about menstruating, but they do need to bring with them an open mind.
Yeah. And an open heart.
Yeah, open heart for sure.
So, Lisa, I just wanted to ask you, so having been on the immersion with Alexandra and Sjanie, are you doing particular work in the area of menstruation yourself?
Yes, I have just set myself up as a women's coach, as a women's menstruality coach, which I'm really excited about. And I will be working with women one-to-one online, or if they're in Manchester, I'm based in Manchester, they can come and meet me. And my website is yourcyclematters.com, yourcyclematters.com. And I also hope to run in the future workshops around menstrual cycle awareness. Yeah. And what about you, Julia?
I teach yoga from my studio in Finchley, and the yoga that I teach is very grounded in the work of menstrual cycle awareness, even allowing for the fact that men are part of some of my classes.
Great.
It's very much, it's lovely to practice heart womb meditation and to know physical practices that can help you at various times in your cycle. So that's very much part of the teaching that I do. All the details of my classes can be found on my website, which is finchleyoga.com.
How do you spell that?
So
how do you spell that, Julia?
FINCHLEY.
Okay, Finchley Yoga. Great. Okay, I'll put the both of our websites and the details of where you can buy this book in the description below on the channel. And yeah, we really hope that you consider buying the book. So that's it from us. Do you have anything else to say, Julia, before we go?
No, it's been lovely chatting with you, Lisa.
Yeah, you too. Yeah. Okay. Take care. Okay. See you.
Bye.